All right, hello everyone. Welcome to our March Learning Exchange titled Evaluating Skills Demonstration Using a Competency Model Lens. My name is Francesca Robinson, and I'm an instructional designer with APHSA and a liaison for the National Staff Development and Training Association. Before I turn it over to our wonderful presenters for today, I just wanted to share a little bit of information about this webinar and some additional upcoming events. So for this webinar, it is being recorded, and the PowerPoint as well as the recording will be shared with you all as in a post-webinar email that you'll probably get early next week. During the presentation today, we ask that you use the questions and answers feature to submit any questions and keep the chat for more general comments or reactions. If you can go to the next slide, Chad. So I wanted to share that the 2025 NSDTA Education Conference will be in Norfolk, Virginia on October 5th through the 8th this year, and registration is not open yet, but that information will be released soon. And this conference really just brings together workforce development experts to connect and learn and engage on best practices. And if you can go to the next slide, Chad. So in addition to the conference in October, NSDTA is offering two types of webinars throughout this year. They'll host a variety of showcase series that highlight content from the 2024 NSDTA conference. So if you were unable to attend that conference, this gives you a great opportunity to see some of those sessions. And then we're also offering learning exchanges like this one that discuss various topics in the human services sector through guided discussion. So with that all said, let me now turn it over to our presenters to kick off today's discussion.
Thanks, Francesca. Hi, everybody. My name is Marlo Perry. I am from the University of Pittsburgh School of Social Work, where I am the Director of Research and Evaluation for our Child Welfare Education and Research programs. And I will pass it to my colleague and friend, Chad McDonald, to introduce himself.
Hello, everybody. I'm at the University of Utah College of Social Work. I'm the director of the Social Research Institute there, as well as the PI of our Title IV training and education contract with our public child welfare agency here, focusing on workforce and competency development.
If you haven't done so already, feel free to drop in the chat where you're joining us from. And just a reminder that the goal for these learning exchanges is that they are interactive. So Chad and I have some info to share with folks, but please feel free to unmute to ask questions. You can throw questions in the chat as well, and we'll have some time at the end for discussion and some big large group Q&A. So as Francesca said, today we're talking about evaluating skill demonstration using a competency model lens. And we landed on this topic a few months ago. We, as a research and evaluation committee of NSDTA, wanted to learn more about what NSDTA attendees and constituents wanted more resources around related to research and evaluation. So we sent out a brief survey in December and January that maybe some of you responded to, and if so, thank you. And the top two responses there were, how do I assess skill demonstration in the learning context? And I want to know more about how to assess skill demonstration in the work environment. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Next slide. So we have three goals for our session today. One is to provide an overview of competency models, and then we'll talk about a few different ways to assess competencies, and then we'll spend some time talking with each other about where you might be succeeding and where you might be facing challenges related to understanding skills and performance of your workforce. So the first question is we want you to respond to is just, why do we train? Most of us are engaged with training of human services professionals in some way. Why do we train? Just throw it in the chat. Feel free to unmute. Nobody? Become better at our jobs? Yep. To ensure skill alignment, help people learn, further knowledge. Oh, now they're flying in. Increase knowledge and understanding, improve services. Yes, all of these things. develop staff skills, which help our clients reach our organizational goals and increase staff satisfaction. Yes, all of these things, competencies, adapt to change. Great. Okay. So the next slide then, how do we know our training is working? Pre-post tests, okay. Evaluation. Customer service complaints, okay. Post-training assessments, follow-up surveys, simulations, feedback, coach or mentor feedback, error or accuracy and performance rates, fidelity. Great. Evaluation mindset transformation on the job application. All right, awesome. Thank you. So often evaluations of training focus on perceptions of or satisfaction with training, right? So that kind of level one sort of survey, or on knowledge acquisition. So some of you talked about that. So pre-post tests, knowledge tests, things like that. Some agencies and more agencies recently are able to look at skill demonstration within the learning context. So maybe you're using simulation, maybe you're using virtual reality. But how do we know if what they're learning in the training room makes its way into practice? And this is where competency models can be helpful. Before we dive in, we're going to talk about just a couple of important distinctions. The first is between training competencies and job competencies. So they seem pretty straightforward, right? So training competencies are what a learner can do or understand or know at the end of a training, versus a job competency, which is what they should be able to know, understand, or do after a specific period of time working on the job. And ideally after maybe some coaching or mentoring in the field. So these might not be distinctly different competencies, rather they would be progressively more complex levels of skills for the same competency. So we wouldn't expect someone that has just finished their new caseworker training to have the same level of competency that we would expect someone to have who's been working in the field for 10 years. So training competencies might be a little bit heavier on knowledge or attitudes, with entry-level kind of performance behaviors, whereas job competencies might be a little bit more behaviorally complex, a little bit more nuanced, and have more items associated with higher levels of proficiency. Next slide. And then another important distinction we wanted to make was between practice models and competency models. So while these are certainly related, they have different purposes. So a practice model is to guide and inform practice. So those might include skills, they may include values. For example, in Pennsylvania, our practice model includes values such as respect and organizational excellence, as well as skills such as engagement and teaming. And competency models help to operationalize what those practices should look like. So specific behaviors or tasks. So if we're using the example of teaming as a skill in our practice model, some tasks could be, identifying relevant team members for a particular kind of case, or establishing clear methods of documentation and communication for a particular kind of case. And then competency models can also help to inform job descriptions and recruitment. So maybe there are specific competencies that you want to hire for, particularly if they're not things that you are necessarily going to train for. So you might want to think about hiring competencies related to things like critical thinking or writing. Competency models can also help with performance management and retention. So using a performance appraisal process to identify how well workers are evidencing particular competencies. And then further along in the continuum, you might be able to connect worker outcomes to client outcomes, right? So perhaps a worker who shows high levels of engagement also shows better case closure outcomes for families with whom they work. And we'll talk a little bit more about what these might look like in a few minutes. But first, I'm going to pass it to Chad, who's going to talk more specifically about competency models.
Thanks, Marlo. So before we get into how to evaluate competency, let's take a minute to talk about what competency models actually are and why they matter. So at their core, competency models provide a structured framework that outlines the essential knowledge, skills, and attitudes. In the literature, you often see this as KSAs, needed for a specific job or role. And these models don't just describe what employees do, they define how they should do it effectively. So by breaking down competencies into clear and measurable components, we can set expectations for job performance, track progress, ensure that employees are developing in ways that truly matter. But competency models aren't just about defining skills. They're also about alignment. As some of you said in your comments earlier, they help ensure that the capabilities of the workforce are directly tied to the agency goals and performance outcomes. So without a structured competency model, organizations often struggle with inconsistency. Employees may be skilled in some areas, but lacking in others. And so training may not always be focused on the right priorities. Whereas a well-designed competency model ensures that the skills we are developing in our workforce are the same ones that drive success for the agency. For example, if an agency's mission is to improve family stability, then competencies related to engagement with families, crisis intervention should be clearly defined, measured, and strengthened across the workforce. This alignment ensures that every employee, from frontline workers to leadership, is contributing to the broader goals of the agency in a meaningful way. And finally, competency models serve as the foundation for recruitment, training, professional development, performance management, as Marlo mentioned. They help us attract the right talent by making sure job descriptions and interview processes focus on the competencies that matter most. Once employees are on board, competency models guide training and development by identifying the skills that need to be reinforced. They also play a critical role in performance management. So when an employee is evaluated, their competency model serves as a roadmap for assessing strengths and areas for improvement. Beyond that, they help with succession planning, career growth, ensure that employees understand what skills they need to develop in order to advance in their careers. So in short, competency models aren't just another HR tool. They're the backbone of an effective workforce strategy. They define expectations, align skills with agency goals, and create a structured approach to talent management that benefits both the employees and their organization from what I like to call cradle to competence, all the way from recruitment all the way to that experienced worker. So each of these areas plays a critical role in how we build and sustain an effective competency-based workforce. So first, let's talk about the importance of linking knowledge, skills, and attitudes, or KSAs, to agency goals. Every organization has a mission, but success depends on making sure that the skills of the workforce are directly aligned with that mission. I wonder how many of us can quote our own agency's missions right now, right? And how often are we thinking about this connection? When we clearly define the KSAs that contribute to organizational success, we create a workforce that is not just capable, but strategically positioned to make a real impact. So next, we look at proficiency levels and performance indicators. Not all employees operate at the same level of expertise. So rather than just thinking of competency as a yes or no qualification, we need to think of it as a spectrum. We see this a lot in the field where folks are looking at whether their employees are competent, and the proficiency levels are sometimes absent in this, and they struggle with this because it's never really just black and white that way. But by defining clear proficiency levels and outlining specific behaviors that indicate competency at each level, we make it possible to assess and support growth over time. So after that, we'll discuss how competency models integrate with workforce development, HR practices. Competency models shouldn't exist in a vacuum. They should be embedded in hiring, training, performance evaluations, career development, merit increases, and so forth. When competencies are fully integrated into workforce management, they become a guiding framework for recruitment, training, long-term professional development. And finally, we'll cover the importance of continuous assessment and iterative refinement. Competencies are not static. People develop, job demands change, and best practices evolve. So that's why competency assessment needs to be an ongoing process. By continuously measuring competencies, providing feedback, and refining our approach, we can create the system that keeps employees growing and organizations adapting to meet these challenges. So these 4 concepts, aligning KSAs with agency goals, defining proficiency levels, integrating competency models into workforce development, and continuously refining the model, they're essential to building a strong, capable workforce. And they're a bit of this, we wanted to address this part first because they're fundamental to being able to adequately evaluate these performance metrics of the workforce. So let's explore each of these more in detail with practical insights into how they can be applied effectively. So when we think about competency models, the first and most important question we should ask is, are the knowledge, skills, and attitudes of our workforce directly aligned with our goals, like we mentioned? This might often be called competency mapping. This allows us to ensure that the work we do each day is not just efficient, but effective in driving real impact. In helping some jurisdictions develop their competencies, I often think am faced with a whole host of competencies that the list is almost insurmountable. This competency mapping allows us to address the things that really directly align with the agency mission and goals as a way for us to more effectively reduce and focus our competency groups into manageable chunks. So defining what skills and behaviors are necessary to achieve our mission, we create this workforce that is aligned with our objectives. And this means that instead of just hiring for general skill sets, we're recruiting, training, developing people whose competencies are tailored to these needs, to the needs of the clients. So how do we actually put this into practice? It starts by breaking down high-level goals into concrete skills. If our goal is to improve child welfare case outcomes, for example, then we need to identify specific KSAs, such as engagement skills, crisis intervention techniques, like we've mentioned, or assessment capabilities that will directly contribute to that outcome. So when we do this effectively, employees gain a clear line of sight between their daily tasks and the larger mission of the agency. This not only helps them feel more connected to the work, but also improves overall service quality because they understand clearly what is expected of them. Research shows that when employees understand their competencies and they contribute to the agency's success, they are more engaged and committed. Ultimately, aligning KSAs with agency goals leads to a workforce that isn't just well trained, but also invested in the mission of the agency. So how do we measure competency? It's not enough to say someone is either competent or not, like we mentioned. We need a way to track progress and growth over time, and that's where proficiency levels and performance indicators come in. Rather than looking at competency as a yes or no outcome, we should view it as a spectrum. We define levels like emerging, proficient, and expert to describe an employee's ability at any given point. This structure allows us to be more precise in coaching, mentoring, as some of you mentioned, and develop talent. Now, the key to making this work is using performance indicators, observable behaviors that help us assess competency in real-world settings. And I want to reemphasize that. When we talk about performance indicators, we're talking about things that can be observed, behaviors that tell us where they are at on this spectrum of competency in the real-world setting. For example, a novice with emerging engagement skills might be able to identify basic strategies for engaging families, while an expert, of course, would not only demonstrate advanced engagement techniques, but also mentor others in the process. These indicators make evaluations objective and help us provide meaningful feedback. So by framing competency in terms of progression, we shift our mindset from simply assessing people to actually helping them grow. So employees can see where they are, where they need to go, and what steps will help them get there. And this approach fosters a continuous learning culture where skill development is an ongoing journey rather than a one-time achievement. Feels less like a negative thing and more like a supportive thing if it's something that's embedded into the culture when they understand that there are still areas that they can grow. So how do we integrate competency models into our broader workforce development and HR processes? A strong competency model isn't just a reference document. It's embedded, like we said, into every stage of the employee life cycle, like cradle to competence, right? First, it starts with hiring. Instead of just relying on generic job descriptions, we can use competency-based criteria to select candidates with the right skills and potential. Interview questions and assessments should be aligned with key competencies we need in our agency. This is why I really like using performance-based interviewing techniques. There are questions that ask the candidate things like, tell us of a time when, or how did you handle? These kinds of questions get the candidate to report on actual situations they've experienced instead of imagining themselves in theoretical situations, which we've all primed ourselves to shine the best at and are great to do, but they don't always get us at a clear picture of someone's competency or skill at the time. So performance-based interviewing can be a bit more skills-based. Then, once employees are on board, we use the same framework for training and professional development. Competencies provide the structure for coaching, performance evaluations, and career progression. Instead of one-size-fits-all training, we can tailor development efforts to help employees strengthen the specific skills they need to advance. This empowers our coaches to be able to say, you did really well in ... this thing, and this is one area that you can improve. Or they can be very specific on all these things when they know concretely the performance metrics and the behaviors that are expected for a specific competency. So this integration also has real benefits, not just for performance, but also for retention. When employees have clear competency expectations, structured development pathways, and competency-based promotions, they feel more supported in their careers and are more likely to stay. This increases job satisfaction, reduces turnover, ultimately leading to a more stable, skilled, and engaged workforce. Simply put, when competency models are fully integrated into workforce development, everyone benefits: the agency, the employees, and the communities and clients we serve. So finally, we need to acknowledge that competency models should never be static, as we've mentioned. Just as our workforce grows and evolves, so should our approach to competency assessment. Rather than treating competency evaluation as a one-time event, and I know sometimes this is outside of our control, resource strapped agencies, it can be really difficult. Where we can, we should treat competency evaluation as an iterative approach, a continuous process. This means using multiple methods. As you mentioned earlier in this presentation, supervisor evaluations, peer feedback, client outcomes, and real-world observations, surveys, that sort of thing. Get a full picture of employee competency over time. Regular assessments help us identify strengths and gaps early, so we can take action before small issues become major performance challenges. But assessment's only half the equation. The result of these evaluations need to feed back into training and practice decisions for administration and development programs and so forth. If we notice that caseworkers across the agency are struggling with a particular competency, say like risk assessment, for example, that tells us we need to enhance our training in that area. This cycle of assessing, identifying gaps, refining training programs ensures that competency development is always evolving to meet the needs of the workforce. I also want to emphasize the flip side. Some agencies get caught up in this rut of thinking everything should be solved by additional training around a thing. And sometimes that's not the case. There are several other factors that can be part of that. If for this presentation, we're just staying focused on what a training needs analysis might identify as where those improvements need to be made. And on a broader level, we should also be continuously refining the competency model itself. Every few years, for example, we need to step back and ask, are these competencies still relevant? Do they still align with our agency goals and the changing demands of the field? For example, if the administration has been changed out, that might be a good time to look at the competency model and make sure alignment is still in place. By regularly updating our competency framework based on evidence and feedback, we keep it from becoming outdated or disconnected from real-world practice. But of course, changing it too often, which some do fall victim to, also presents some of its own evaluation challenges. So building in an update cycle every few years might be the sweet spot between remaining relevant and remaining research valid. At the end of the day, competency management isn't about creating a rigid checklist. It's about building a system that fosters growth, adaptation, and continuous improvement. So when we get this right, we create a workforce that is not only competent today, but also prepared for the challenges of tomorrow. So,
Okay, so
Mark,
now we're going to talk a little bit about how to evaluate competency, and we've touched on this a little bit. So most jurisdictions, if they're getting at this at all, are relying on worker self-report. So typically assessing worker confidence or competence in particular skills. This is valuable, certainly, but not sufficient. And ideally, we want to get beyond that and have some sort of outside perspective on skill demonstration. So this could happen through supervisor surveys of workers or surveys of workers about their supervisors too, where they indicate frequency or strength of particular skills. So supervisors might make ratings based on their overall perception of a worker, based on content of their supervision sessions, overview of their case notes, things like that. A slightly more rigorous approach then would be utilizing, as Chad had talked about, performance reviews or competency assessments. So these would rely on direct observation of skill demonstration. And rating their proficiency at particular skills. And obviously this is a lot more resource intensive, which is why most folks aren't doing it. It's one thing to complete a survey based on my perception of how I think my worker is doing. It's a lot harder to make time to go out with them for a family visit or sit in on a family engagement conference or go with them to court to see how they are demonstrating particular skills. And then those can be rolled up at a larger level and incorporated into some workforce analytics. And those can help you evaluate or monitor competency at an aggregate level. So this would be helpful in moving beyond using competency to gauge and support individual worker growth and professional development and help you make more informed decisions about your workforce overall. So you could, for example, gather data on individual and or team performance on case closure rates. So maybe folks who show higher levels of proficiency on teaming show more successful outcomes of family engagement conferences. You can track case outcomes. So maybe rates of successful family reunification. So maybe workers who are more competent at engagement show higher levels of reunification outcomes. You can't understand or know these things unless you're collecting this information at routine intervals and rolling it up at an aggregate level. And you might want to also look at differences across maybe offices if your agency serves a large area, or educational backgrounds, or folks who participate in Title IV-E education programs, are they showing higher levels of proficiency in certain areas?
so as we kind of wrap up this part of our discussion on competency models, I want to just emphasize some do's and don'ts that we kind of referenced along the way, but they bear a minute here. When it comes to measuring competency particularly, the reality is if we don't measure competency effectively, it becomes difficult to know if our workforce development efforts are actually making an impact. As we've already discussed, if we just relied on the survey at the end of a training, how did you like this? Was it relevant for your job? Do you feel like you're better at this? That gives us one part of the puzzle, yes, but no single assessment method can give us a full picture of competency. So multiple assessment methods should be combined to approach a competency from different angles. This means including supervisor evaluations, self-assessments, of course, peer feedback, and also real-world observations. After all, the true test of competency isn't passing a quiz, as we all know, but demonstrating skills in various different circumstances and consistently applying that skill at a proficient level. So notice how this is multiple angles to assess the same skill set. It's not multiple initiatives or programs or strategies or new practices coming out by administration to try to fix a trend. That's not what we're talking about. The latter can be uh, um, uh, it can be an effective competency model killer, if you will. So another key best practice is defining clear and observable performance indicators. So too often, competency assessments are vague, or they're really verbose and long, and they're using terms like demonstrates leadership or works well with clients without specifying what those behaviors actually look like. So instead, we need to ask what specific actions or outcomes indicate that someone is competent. When we define these indicators clearly, we make competency measurable and easier to track over time. I remember speaking with our training director here in Utah regarding a specific competency. After some struggle, she vocalized her surprise about how even after doing the thing herself for more than 15 years, how difficult it was to take this seemingly common task that she's used to doing all the time um, and define it in terms of what the behavior looks like. How would someone else know that they're competent in that thing just by observing them? So it can be a lot trickier than we might think once we get down to this level. If you find yourself pushing up against that, great, you're on the right track, I would say. So it's also critical that competency assessments align with agency goals, like we've mentioned. If we're measuring skills that don't directly contribute to better client outcomes or organizational success, we are wasting time. I noticed here, I help in a couple of jurisdictions work through their competency models as well. And it wasn't until we asked this question of how well it aligned with their agency mission and vision did it become easier for them to start cutting out some of this. They almost had like every competency you can think of because it was just great for every worker to know all of these things, and it was just unsustainable. So once they finally just focused in on what directly linked to the mission and the vision of their agency, were they able to finally pare it down. So now let's talk about some common pitfalls. One of the biggest mistakes organizations make is treating competency assessment as a one-time event. Too often, competency is evaluated only during annual performance reviews or at the end of a training program, and then it's forgotten. But competency isn't static. It evolves with experience and practice. I remember reading Good to Great once with Jim Collins, who said that of the 11 companies that made that switch from good to great, they all invested what was required to adequately train their workforce up to competency. Instead of saying, for example, that their training could only do A and B, they asked what was necessary for their workforce to become competent, and they committed that. Another pitfall is relying too much on self-assessment. While self-reflection is valuable, it can be biased. Some employees will overestimate their abilities, while others may lack confidence and underestimate themselves. I'm sure we're all aware of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where our confidence tends to outpace our competence when comparing pre to post training self-assessments, for example. That's why competency assessment should always be balanced with external evaluations, whether from supervisors, colleagues, or clients. And I say external to the worker being evaluated for competency, right? Or even clients. Finally, one of the most common and damaging pitfalls is failing to provide actionable feedback. And this part is surprisingly difficult sometimes. If we tell an employee they need to improve their competency and critical thinking, but don't provide specific guidance on how to develop that skill, the assessment loses its value. Every competency evaluation should come with clear next steps, whether it's additional training, coaching, mentorship, new opportunities to apply the skill in practice, etc. When we measure competency effectively, we do more than just track performance. We create a culture of continuous learning and improvement, like ultimately is what leads to stronger organizations and better outcomes for the people we serve. So, we would like for this next part, well, let me ask, we're going to go into breakout, but I would ask, Marlo, is it okay? Any questions up to this point about anything we've discussed?
And throw questions in the chat. You can also just unmute yourself and voice them.
Or even concerns, lamentations about your situation. All right. Okay. We're going to ask you for some additional comments after this next piece here. We're going to have Francesca assign you all to various breakout rooms of, I don't know, 3 to 5, whatever you decide to do, Francesca. And we'd like you each, I don't know if it's possible if you can show this screen while they're in their breakouts. If that's possible, who knows? Two items we'd like each of you in your breakout to address. What are the challenges you are experiencing in your purview, whatever agency or role you're in right now, in measuring competency? And what are some of the successes you may have been having or know of that others that you might be working with have been having in measuring competency? So two things, challenges and successes. We're going to give you about 12 or 13 minutes, you think? Or yeah, we'll give you about 12 or 13 minutes. So make sure to have a good conversation. Marlo and I might pop in and out a few of these breakouts. Then we're going to bring you back together. We're not going to ask everyone to, report out, but we are going to ask for a few volunteers who might be willing to share what some of the things were that they discussed afterward.
Does anyone want to share any of the conversations there? Maybe just start with successes. What's going well for some of you in this area? What are successes that you're having?
So I'll speak for our group.
Thanks.
We talked about our successes and we realized maybe that we had more successes than we initially thought.
Exciting.
One of our big ones, Vonda was talking about field shadowing and real world experiences and how those kinds of things really help with that transfer of learning, because like Mickey was talking about, a lot of times we see that while they're in training, they come across successfully with those training competencies, but then once they get out into the real world and they have to apply that knowledge, a lot of times maybe they don't meet those competencies. And so Vonda was indicating that for them with that field shadowing and that real world observation, it helps kind of improve those critical thinking skills. It helps with that transfer of learning. So then they can take training competencies and actually, begin to show actual job competencies. And then, Felix was talking about being able to kind of coach and mentor those new workers in helping to identify their strengths and what they're already good at, what they were good at in training, and then kind of building on that once they get on the job is very helpful.
Great. Thanks for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
I'll follow up with that because we had a similar conversation about a system that we have in my locality where newer employees shadow and then they are shadowed doing work. So there's that opportunity to sort of watch behavior and then to demonstrate behavior and competencies. And I had my aha moment was actually in the session and then carried over to the breakout session when I thought, we stop doing that when people show competencies, and we probably should continue that throughout someone's entire career because we know the work changes and our clients change, and really being able to have that opportunity to observe, or people develop bad habits over time, or, decompensate as their career is coming to a close. So I just figured that it'll be interesting to have that conversation about how we build that into a regular process, not just after a training or when someone's new, but really as an ongoing tool to look at competencies over time.
Yeah, that's a great observation. Yeah,
Right.
practice drift is real, right? Fidelity, there's drift from fidelity over time. Any other aha moments folks want to share related to successes or challenges or action steps that you want to take when you get back?
I think an aha for me was that and thanks Chad for and Mike Group for the bringing this up, but that when administration says, oh, we need this new training about this, I think it was in Pittsburgh, they actually do a needs assessment to say, okay, right? Like, so what need are we trying to meet? Tie that back to a competency and then say, okay, so how do you know it that this change was created by the training? Because so often they gotta, oh, we gotta fix this with training without really deeply understanding, is this in one particular area of the state? Is it the whole state? Is it a new practice? So there's a lot of nuance in that. And so that was a helpful reminder and process for me.
I helped our state administrators once roll out a statewide training, and after a couple months, they came back to me and said, "Hey, Chad, we need to create a follow-up training." And I asked why, and they said because they're getting inundated with all the questions still about how to do this or that. And I simply asked, well, how many of them have taken the training so far? Turned out less than 20% of that area of the state, just that area, had taken it, where all those questions were coming from. So your point is valid, June.
I'll chime in real quick. I was in June and Chad's team as well. I am in Pittsburgh and we do have a needs assessment. And I think the needs assessment, so I'm on the learning and development team, and anytime we get a training request, we complete a needs assessment. We go through, we identify like the mission, the value, the vision of that department. What are the measurable goals or the outcomes? What would you like to see if this is successful? And we work closely with different stakeholders to develop whatever training or learning experience. However, we don't have a consistent competency model that we're able to refer back to measure. I would love to have it integrated, like our friend from Rutgers shared. I don't remember your name, but integrating that into everything, that would be ideal. But because it's such a complex organization, we haven't been able to really get the traction to have the conversations with so many different program offices, different levels from, clerical to leadership and those things. So the needs assessment is great, but it's not perfect.
I'm noticing as well, Bethany in the chat commenting on, do you want to talk about that a little more, Bethany? Here, how training was not necessarily not effective, but turnover was having an impact on?
Sure. We had a diverse group of agency representation and role in our breakout. So that was great to hear and share. But we had talked about the different experiences we had from California to the Virgin Islands to Maine and in between around what you all talked about, like the competencies for training, and then mixed with what someone else had said around having that job shadow experience, which is integrated in a lot of the training, and then best practice, which is taught, and then what they're experiencing when they get out to do the job, and the workload being a part of that. And so their staff is overworked everywhere. And then whether it's dependent on the relationship with their supervisor and how much support they get, whether that's in additional training or just in such advocacy and things.
Yeah. Definitely not a simple, direct approach. So many variables can be impacting some of these successes and challenges, which is why I like the idea of a training needs analysis, which can help focus on whether or not something can even be solved through training. It might not even be in this preview of the discussion we've been having, for this past hour. It might be entirely something different. Any other comments, ahas? All right, nobody burning desire to say one more item? I, I will emphasize the importance that it can become overwhelming if we try to tackle it all at once, and that's not feasible. I'm hoping that each of you at least has heard something, shared something that has provided for you or others something that you can take back to your agencies in tackling one piece of this, whether it just be updating your job descriptions to map to the practice model or to your competency model, right? So that your recruitment might be a little bit more targeted for those who are a good fit, or whether it be to increase or just to go through the competency mapping exercise. We're willing to share some. We've got a couple examples. If you want to send us an email of different measurement tools that we've gotten permission to share that do show the different competencies, their descriptions, their performance indicators, proficiency levels, as examples for you if you're interested. Feel free to reach out, or we might see about just including that in the thank you email that Francesca will send out after this. Marlo, any last comments?
No, just thanks everybody for joining and for engaging in conversation about this. We appreciate it.
Thank you. And
Francesca, you had one more thing to say, I think.
I just wanted to say real quick, if you can please send those in the email, that would be nice, in the thank you email, the resources, that would be very helpful.
Okay. All right. Good luck in taking the next step. It's an ongoing
Yeah,
process.
can you show the next slide with the QR code?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. QR code.
One more, there we go. Feedback is appreciated. So you want to do the quick survey with using the QR code? That'd be great. Thank you.
Just
Or
pull
the
up your
link
phone,
that
take a quick
Francesca
snapshot
put
of
in
it.
the chat. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good Friday afternoon.
Okay.
Thank you all. And just as a quick reminder, I know people are leaving, but the thank you email will go out early next week. So just keep an eye out for that.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Thanks so much. You too.